A lady by the name of Roberta Mesner is a frequent contributor to Guidepost magazine. And this month she has a powerful story that is filled with symbolism and meaning. And I'll do my best not to butcher it. The story opens, and these are my words, this is my impression. She is sitting on her front porch on her own little self-pity pot. She has had some difficult experiences in her life the last few years. She had once been a successful professional nurse, but she had been hit with a lot of challenges. She had a neurological disease. I can't pronounce it. It's all Latin and about that long. But the result of this thing, the condition that she had, is that she would grow these horrible, painful tumors all over her body. And the pain had racked her entire life. And they required surgery after surgery. And she was at a place where she didn't have all the insurance that she'd had before, and the cost of these surgeries had drained her bank account, and she was unable to afford to keep up her beautiful, beautiful house. And I remember when she got that, I've been reading Guideposts a long time, and I remember when she got that, it was about a 120-year-old log cabin, and she absolutely adored that place, and she took magnificent care of it, and it was just wonderful. But with all of the setbacks that she had had, she wasn't able to keep up on it. And it had a leak in the roof, and so water was penetrating and coming down the walls, and the paint was peeling, and her furnace was out, her boiler wasn't working right, and her initial look at that, it was going to be an all-new boiler. She had, tens of thousands of dollars thinking that was going to cost. It was just on and on. In fact, her whole plumbing system needed a lot of work. It was all just heaped up on her. And as she sat in her porch, she looked out, and her once beautiful yard and garden had overgrown, and there were bushes and weeds and brambles all over. And she was just there in that place of deep depression when a man and a little boy walked by, and they couldn't see her for all of the weeds and brambles that had grown up, but she could hear them, and the little boy said, "Daddy, is that house haunted?" And it just hit her, and she thought, oh, yes, this house does look like it's haunted, and I'm the ghost. But she took that at its value and decided that she could do something different. And I have it here somewhere, she put up a sign in her front yard, handwritten, and it said, "Cabin under construction," and a little bit smaller font below it, "like its owner." And the neighbors noticed, and things started to fall in place. You know how that is when you're on a roll and everything goes right? Well, that's what kind of started happening with her. First of all, somebody had saw the sign and came by and said, I'm a contractor, and I'm really, really busy right now. I can't afford to, take time off to help you, but I can look at your place and at least give you recommendations on where to start, which items to do first, and maybe I can give you the name of some people that will be willing to help you out, give you a discount of some type. And so she started with that, and then I think the next thing that happened was she found an opportunity. There was a lady with a roofing company that agreed to come out and take a look at her roof. And then there was a lady who was in a 12-step program. What had happened with these big tumors that she got that were so painful all over her body, her doctor prescribed what at that time was almost a miracle drug of opioids. And oh my goodness, it was like a miracle. For the first time in her life, she was able to move without pain. These opioids were a gift. It was unimaginable. And she took those opioids for several years. And I don't think I need to tell you, it didn't end well. And she became horribly addicted to these opioids. She wrote, and this is a quote from her, "Miraculously, a lifetime of chronic pain faded after I made it through the agony of withdrawal." I told you that this story was filled with so much meaning. Well, here's a hint to one of them. Sometimes we have to go through the pain of withdrawal in order to get to the other side. Sometimes we have to go through the dark of the night before we can appreciate the light of the day. Sometimes we have to go through the cold winter out there. Look at, I put on my spring suit today. For Easter, it's spring, and it is a blizzard. Sometimes we have to go through that blizzard to get to the spring that's on the other side. Well, all of the things started coming together for her. She thought back and she thought about that man and the little boy and the rest of the story. For you see, she sat there in all of that shame and guilt and thinking about that. And the man walked a little further and she heard him say, "Yes, this house does look kind of haunted right now, but it wasn't always that way. There used to be this wonderful lady that lived there. And she was such a delight. She had this beautiful gardens that she took such care of. She had a bench in the back and it was so wonderful." And he said, that place was so beautiful. People came from miles around to see her gardens and whatnot. And I proposed to your mother in her backyard. I went to her one day and asked her if we could do that. And not only did she welcome me, but she said, "And I have a treat for you." She put out a picnic for them on an antique quilt that she had had. She had iced tea and she made him a beautiful lunch. And that's where they decided to get married. And he told his little boy about that. Well, we fast forward to the mess that her house was in. She found out that the heating system, rather than needing a whole new boiler and everything, when she called the heating contractor, they said, "I'm sorry, we're all busy. All of our pros are out in the field today. We got a new kid, though. He's trying to learn the trade and whatnot. How about if I send him out?" And he says, "Okay, I'll take anything." Well, the young guy got there. She said he looked like he was about 16. Underneath her house and through the crawl space and doing everything else. And at the end of the time, she said, "Well, what's the verdict?" And he says, "Well," he says, "the good news is your boiler is fine. Everything is fine, your heating system. You have this one little part that needs to be replaced." And she said, "How much is that going to be?" And he said, $300. And she said, "Oh my, how much labor to put it in?" He says, "No, that includes labor." So this thing that she thought was going to be tens of thousands was 300. And it continued like that throughout the whole renovation of her house. One of the ladies that came was in this 12-step program for opioid addiction. We're all a choice, and we have the freedom to choose again. And it is in a new choice that we can be reborn. Well, welcome everyone. Happy Easter to everyone. I'm glad you all came out today with a lot of people here for Easter, and I hope that those of you who were less brave, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute, and are watching from home, it is indeed an honor to be invited into your home. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Our monthly theme is vulnerability. Last month I talked about it, and I talked about what vulnerability is, what it is not, and why it is important. This week I'm going to talk about some blocks to vulnerability, specifically fear, uncertainty, and comparison. And so those are my 3 points: fear, uncertainty, and comparison. We start off talking about fear. What are the things that hold us back? We're afraid of. We're afraid of failure, fear of rejection, fear of what others may think, fear of not being good enough. Another story here. Glennon Doyle is a very famous author, and in her book, I don't remember her name, Untamed, she tells a story about when her girls were small. They were hounding her, and they wanted to get their ears pierced. And she thought they were too little, but she was in the middle of a tough time with her husband at the time and debating divorce and what to do, and the kids were hammering, I want to get our ears pierced, I want to get my ears pierced. And so finally it was like, okay, we'll go, we'll get your ears pierced. And so they piled into the car, they drove to the mall, and the little one, and I don't know how old they were, but my feeling is they were probably like 6 and 9, maybe. That's roughly the age group. The little one dashes into the mall, knows right where to go, runs up, runs over to the kiosk where they do the ear piercing. I don't know what an ear piercing person is, but the piercer. And she jumped in her piercing chair and she said, "Let's do this." And she arrived with the older daughter, and the piercer, I don't know what that person is. The piercer said, "Is this your daughter? And are you her mother?" And Glennon replied, "Well, I'm trying to be." And she said, "You know, do you want these done like one at a time or both at the same time?" And little Ammon, the daughter, pipes up and she said, "At the same time, let's do this." And Mom says, okay, if that's what she wants. And they proceeded to get her ears pierced, and she said she noticed one little tear trickling down one time, but her daughter wiped it away in a hurry and didn't want anybody to see. And she finished, and she jumped down, and she looked up at her bigger sister, Tish, and says, "It's your turn." And at that moment, Tish leaned over to Glennon and said, "Mom, I don't think I'm ready quite yet for this." And Mom says, "Well, are you sure?" She said, "Yes." She says, I'm not really ready for this." And at that point, the piercer said, "All right, it's your turn. Come on up. Don't be afraid." And that was silent. Everybody's looking at Tish, and she said, "I don't think I'm quite ready for this today." And of course, Emma, the little sister, had to chip in, "Oh, don't be scaredy cat." And, "Come on, Tish, you only live once." And Tish replied, "You know, the only time we ever say that, you know, is when people are afraid or things. Did you ever think that maybe it ought to be the other way around? Don't do that because you only live once." We don't want to hasten the end. But they both left. They left, and both girls were in their own thing. And where I'm going with all of this is the idea of fear. And companion to fear, as we had in our quote this morning, thank you, Linda, it's always a comfort to have you as the platform prac, because I know I'm going to get a consistent thank you. I know that I was raised with the idea that bravery is going ahead and doing it anyway, even though you're afraid. Even though you're afraid, you're brave because you went ahead and did it. This is what Glennon Doyle had to say. We tell our children that brave means feeling afraid and doing it anyway. But is this the definition we want them to carry as they grow older? When she is 17, headed out in a car driven by her teenage buddy, saying that she's going to the movies, but actually going to the kegger on the outside of town? Imagine calling to her, "Bye, babe, be brave tonight." What I mean by this is if you're in a scary situation and you feel afraid to do what your friends are encouraging you to do, I want you to ignore that fear and just do it anyway. Just plow right on through that gut instinct of yours. No, that is not the understanding of brave that I want my children to have. I do not want my children to become people who abandon themselves to please the crowd. Brave from the inside out. Brave means in every uncertain moment, turning inward, feeling for the knowing and speaking it out loud. Since the knowing is a specific and personal and ever-changing, so is brave. Whether you are brave or not cannot be judged by people on the outside. Sometimes being brave requires letting the crowd think that you are a coward. Sometimes being brave means letting everyone down but yourself. And I insert here, these are my words, sometimes being brave means being vulnerable. Now, Emma's brave is often, it is loud, go for it. Tish's brave is often, it is quiet and waiting for it. They are both brave girls because each is true to herself. They are not divided between what they feel and know on the inside and what they say and do on the outside. Their selves are integrated. They have integrity. That just nailed it for me. That is the type of brave that we talk about. When we have that and we move through that vulnerability that we have because of all those fears. Fears of failure, fears of rejection. Ernest Holmes wrote, "There is something within you beyond all doubt and fear, something which has never been limited by your acts or destroyed by your feeling. This is the only something that can make you whole." Fear can be a helpful emotion to let us know areas of our lives that we can explore deeper. Boy. Brave is not necessarily being afraid and doing it anyway. Number 2, uncertainty. Uncertainty. To be vulnerable is to become friends with uncertainty. We love certainty. I know I sure do. Just look at this order of service. I've been senior minister here now going on 9 years, and we have made 2 or 3 tiny little changes to the order of service. I love certainty. I know what's going to happen when. Maybe that's why I like Linda so much. Man, we know what we're going to get. Not necessarily. Wait a minute. I need to think that through. The thought of or hint of uncertainty can stop us in our tracks. This can hamper our willingness to take risks, to be vulnerable. Uncertainty is part of the wholeness of life itself. We can choose to see it as a barrier to opening ourselves up, or we can meet it with curiosity and then move in ways that are in alignment with the truth of who we are. And so that's why I went ahead and wore my favorite spring suit today. Not really in tune with the weather out there, but what the heck? That's what I felt like doing, and to be true to myself, that's what I did. Adam Grant wrote, "Uncertainty primes us to ask questions and absorb new ideas." So maybe we'll be changing up the order of service, I don't know. Comparison, point number 3. Theodore Roosevelt said that comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison impacts our ability to be vulnerable, to be willing to risk, to be willing to step out and reveal our true selves. The instinct is often to take stock of all the people in a room and then gauge our self-expression based on how we rank ourselves in comparison to everyone else. Oh boy. It doesn't take much to see how this can greatly impact our willingness or our ability to safely show up just as we are. Next week, maybe I'll be in my flannel shirt. We may not want to blend in to not be too much. See, I didn't want to be the only person in a suit today. The opportunity exists to look at the areas where we are comparing ourselves to others or playing small and begin to explore how we can use vulnerability to harness the magnificence of our authentic selves. And when I read that, it took me right back to last week's quote, Marianne Williamson, from A Return to Love. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Okay. All this talk about vulnerability, and well, we're winding down time-wise. I imagine you're wondering, when's that fool going to start talking about Easter? Well, today is Easter Sunday. It's the most important date in Christianity. It is important because on this date it was discovered that Jesus was no longer in the tomb. I was given a gift for Christmas last year, and it is a reading from a different faith tradition for every day of the year. And there's some really cool ones in there. I really am enjoying this. And I was anxious to see, what are they going to say on Easter? What is that going to be? Well, Easter's came from the Presbyterian Church of USA. And it is from the Love of God, the Book of Confessions. This is what they said. The power of God's love in Christ to transform the world discloses that the Redeemer is the Lord and Creator who made all things to serve the purpose of His love. When I first read that, it was like, I feel like I'm reading Ernest Holmes. I got to stop and take it word by word and figure out what are they really saying here. The power of God's love in Christ to transform the world. You notice that they use the term Christ. They don't say Jesus, they say Christ. Well, I don't think there's any doubt that there was a guy, Jesus, that walked the earth 2,000 years ago. But it wasn't a guy whose first name is Jesus and his last name is Christ, middle initial H. No, they didn't have their names like that. He had one name, his name was Jesus. And to keep him, separate from the other Jesuses, they would say where he's from. So this was Jesus of Nazareth, not to get him confused with Jesus of Bethesda, Maryland, or Jesus of Rome, Georgia. So he was Jesus of Nazareth. So they use the term Christ, which is the English, if you will, Americanization of the both Latin and Greek terms Christo, which was translation of Messiah. So this isn't Jesus Christ, it's Jesus the Christ, or Jesus the Messiah. And this is not a reference to a man that physically did all these things. It's reference to a principle, the principle of salvation, the principle of rising above the conditions that we face in the world. The Redeemer is the Lord and Creator who made all things to serve the purpose of His love, to serve the purpose of love, which is the nature of that infinite creative force that we are talking about. It's a principle, not a man. Principle of eternality. Ernest Holmes wrote, and this is in the big book, the textbook, to suppose that the objective faculties die with the brain is to suppose that the brain thinks and reasons. This is proved to be false through the experience of death itself. For if the brain could think, it would think on and on forever. No, it is not the brain that thinks. The thinker thinks. Through the brain perhaps, but it is itself, the physical brain has no power to think or feel. Detach the brain and it will not formulate ideas or work out plans. The thinker alone can think. And so our contention is not that dead men live again, but rather that a living man never dies. Where we embrace the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. And once again, I think this needs a little unpacking, similar to what we did with the Presbyterian quote. I want to talk about this. He starts off with saying, to suppose that the objective faculties die with the brain. What does he mean by the objective faculties? Well, it's a two-part thing, objective faculties. One, on the physical plane, that is our five senses. The other is the unseen. It is the invisible. And that is a reference to our thinking, our feeling. It is being able to see the beauty in that blizzard. It is being able to see the beauty in a sunrise. It is being able to see, to love, to feel, to be hurt, to cry, to sit on our pity pot on our porch. It's all of that. And that doesn't stop. That doesn't change. That's not part of the physical thing that's between our ears. This is proved to be false through the experience of death itself. If it could think, the brain would think on and on forever. The thinker thinks, and that is what is eternal. And so all of this goes to underscore the circle of life. We are all constantly being renewed and reborn. We believe in the eternality, the immortality, and the continuity of the individual soul forever and ever expanding. The flower must experience the cold before it pushes through the snow in the spring. We experience the darkness in order to appreciate the light, and sometimes our house has to be haunted before we can renovate. Sometimes we have to feel the pain of withdrawal before we can enjoy the freedom from addiction. What I want you to take away today: choosing to be vulnerable enough to express our authentic selves is not always easy. However, the choice becomes whether or not we allow ourselves to be limited by the experiences that attempt to stand in the way of showing up as our true selves, or to be willing to look them in the face and then move away. Rumi said, "Move, but don't move the way fear makes you move." And so it is with this awareness of that infinite presence that is constantly within each and every one of us, that I invite my colleagues, the practitioners, to join me. I invite each and every one of you in this room to join me in prayer and recognizing that that infinite creative force, which is God, only wants what is best for us. That infinite force wants us to experience life to the absolute fullest. It wants us to stand apart and be willing to be vulnerable. It wants us to accept our less than-ness as only a judgment of ourselves, and accept that which is the truth of who we are, which is love, which is peace, which is joy, which is beauty, those things that are eternal. Those things that are not the eternals are temporary. That is the lack and limitation, the separation, the dis-ease. The truth is love. And so we just give thanks. We give thanks for our awareness of the power and the presence of that infinite God within. We give thanks, we let it go, we let it be, and so it is.
And so it is.